Good afternoon. Don Maxwell from Live IT Academy. Today we're going to be looking at Excel to 2016, and we'll be looking at a more advanced subject for Excel. After completing this lesson, you should understand how to enter labels and values, work with columns and rows, use formulas, use the auto sum, change alignment and number formats, enhance a report, review and print that report. So in this exercise, you'll be working for a marketing company, which needs you to design a sales forecast report. You'll be creating the report using Excel workbook, and you will need to enter products, prices, estimate like first year unit, and you'll have to calculate the total annual cost for the first year sales and enter a release date. So you will enter values and labels, use simple formulas, use auto sum, create alignment and number formats, enhance the report, format the report, and print the report. So let's begin by opening your Excel application and select workbook. All right, as you know, my Excel application is already open. So the next step is to enter labels and values. Entering data in a workbook is like typing into a text box. You click on the cell in which you want to enter the data, look for the insertion point in the cell where the mouse pointer is, and you can type your data in that cell. So after typing the data, accept the entry by pressing the Enter key, or you can press the Tab or the arrow key. Either of those will allow the data to be saved in the cell. So the workbook contains labels and values, and we know labels are text that describe the data in the sheet. Values are numbers that can be used in a calculation. So we're going to edit the cell to make changes. And in order to do that, we must double click the cell. And note that you will no longer be in the ready mode, you will be in the edit mode. So right now, notice we're in the ready mode. So we have to find that cell that we want to start with. So I'm going to begin starting with cell A1. So notice I placed my cursor. Notice the point looks like a cross, a fat cross, and that puts me in the ready mode. Notice ready, and then in the ready mode. But in order to enter data, I must double click on that cell. You will notice that there is a thin line which represent my cursor in that cell. Now I can type. So the first thing I want to do is to create a title, and my title is going to be sales forecast, and I'm going to put it in cell 1. So let's go ahead and put sales forecast. Oh, sorry. All right, so we have sales forecast in cell A1. Next, I'm going to skip the second row, starting 2 here, and I'm going to go to row 3. So I'm in cell A3. And here I'm going to create a subtitle. I'm going to call it the first year annual sales forecast. All right, and that's the title. So make sure if you have to do any correction, notice that as I type in the formula bar, data is here. So I can either click back in the cell, edit the cell, or I can make my correction since I'm still entering the data from the formula bar. All right, so here I type in the cell, and I can also type as well in the formula bar. All right, so the next step is I'm going to skip row 4, and I'm going to go to row 5. And in row 5, I'm going to be typing in my labels, right? So starting in A5, I'm going to type the first label, and that will be my product label. Product. Now, if I press the tab key on my keyboard, I will go to the next cell, which is vertical, which is horizontal, cell B5, right? So the next label I'm going to put in is the net price. Again, if I press tab, I will go to cell C5. And here I'm going to type the first year's unit. All right, so these are called header labels. I'm now going to enter underneath my product header label some data, right? And for this marketing purpose, we are looking at some jewelry. So I'm going to be entering under product the type of data that the product represents. An anklet, and if I press the enter button, not the down arrow, but the enter button. If I press the enter button, I will go to the next cell, which is A7. So here I'm going to continue to put in a few data. So you can follow along while I type. Notice I press the enter button to go to the next cell. And if you do make an error, you simply go back, select the cell, and again, you can make the change inside the cell. Notice it would be the edit mode, right? So now if I'm in the edit mode, I can change information in the edit mode, right? Notice as I go to the next cell, I hit enter, I'm back in the ready mode, and I'm going to type, so I'm going to go to the enter mode. So it's ready, enter, or edit mode. So I'm going to continue to type my data. This one is bracelet. I keep pressing the enter button to go to the next row, the next cell. Okay, so once I've completed that, now I need to go and enter data, some data in under net price, right? Again, net price is the price of the product. And again, I can do just what I did before, just simply hitting the enter button. Okay, now I'm done with that. Then the next thing I want to do, enter the unit costs, the first year's unit costs. I'm going to go right under the unit costs. Now, I'm not too worried about the format of the sheet yet. I'm simply entering data. And this is showing you how to enter labels, enter the data, and so on. All right, so don't be too concerned about the format at this point. Just simply enter the data, and then we'll format the report after. All right, so note pressing the tab has the same effect as if you're pressing the left arrow key as well, right? Or we can press the control enter, has the same effect as clicking the enter button. So if we did press the control enter, it would be the same, or if we use the enter button here, it would be the same, okay? All right, so that's how we, that's how we enter labels and values into the sheet, right? So the next step we're going to look at is how we're going to be working with the columns and the rows. All right, and this way we're going to be adjusting the width of a column and the height of a row. And we're going to be using our mouse. Of course, we also could use the command or adjust the width of the column or using the shortcut menu. All right, so if you use the mouse, however, the mouse is quick and easy. It's an easy method you can use to adjust the width and the height as well. All right, you can also insert or delete columns or rows, and we can use the insert or delete button to do that. All right, so at this point, mind that this is a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get, right? So whatever form the report takes, that's what's going to be on the printer. All right, so at this point, let's position the mouse pointer at the crosshairs of A and B column right here, right? So if I put my cursor on that crosshair, notice I'm putting it right up on the header labels, the A and B header label, but I'm putting it on the crosshairs, right between them. Notice the cursor has now changed to a double arrow, right? So I can put my cursor there, and if I double click, notice the cell will open to the largest label in that row or in that column, right? So I can simply drag to affect the changes as well, right? I can put it right on the crosshairs. What I do to one, I can do to the other, right? And keep in mind that I can also drag with my mouse. I place my mouse on the crosshairs. It turns into a double arrow. Look what it looks like. It's that black double arrow, right? And that now I can drag, right? So I go from my ready mode, which is that thick plus sign. And if I put it on the crosshairs, you'll see that it turns into a thin double arrow plus sign, right? And that means I can then drag and extend right? I can drag and extend my columns. Okay, so notice I double click at first to extend to the largest label in that column or row, right? Or I can simply put my cursor on the crosshair and drag to whatever length I want, right? We'll just keep it like that. All right, next step is we're going to be using formulas. All right, so the next step is using formulas to perform calculations. Now, you must first determine what we call the resultant cell. The resultant cell is nothing more than the cell where you want to place your answer, right? So, or where we want to put the formula. So a formula is an equation that performs calculation. A formula starts, when you're going to start a formula, you can use a plus sign or the equal sign. My preference is to use the equal sign anyway. And it contains numbers, mathematical operations, cell references. And again, a cell reference is a cell address such as A1, and that it identifies the location of the value in the calculation. So if more than one operation is used in a formula, Excel performs the calculation in what we call the order of precedence, right? And I'm going to lay out for you later on what the order of precedence calculation is, right? So, but you may copy and move formulas just like data, right? So when you copy the formula to a new cell, Excel automatically replaces the original cell reference with the cell reference that are in the same relative position as those in the original formula, right? And you'll see what I mean by that when we do the exercise. All right, and so this is called a relative cell reference, relative cell reference. So in your report, you will need to create a formula that calculates the first year's forecast for each product, which is the net price multiplied by your first year unit, right? And so let's create a formula first to calculate that. And for the forecast product, we'll fill the formula to the other cells using what we call the fill handle. So that's another tool, the fill handle. So basically what we're saying is here we're going to put a header. First, we're going to put a header, and that header is going to be called annual sales. And again, you can adjust. If you want to adjust at this point, you can adjust by simply clicking the crosshairs and dragging. All right, so in our forecast, we want to project what the annual sales is going to be. And the annual sales is nothing more than the net price times the unit, right? So we have the first year unit and we have the net price. So in order to put a formula in, the first thing I have to do is put in either the equal sign or the plus. I prefer the equal sign, so I'll use the equal sign. And I'm going to click on the first cell that I'm trying to multiply. And I'm going to use the asterisk because the asterisk represent multiplication. In Excel, the asterisk is your multiplication sign. And then the next cell that I'm going to click on is the unit. So notice the formula. Equal B6 times C6, right? So what does that mean? When I press the enter button, I should get an answer. And it simply takes the 100 and multiplied by the 6,000, so I should get 60,000. That looks correct, right? All right, so now that I have that answer, that sales amount for anklets, I need to have the sales amount for the rest of my product. Well, Excel allows me a tool called the fill handle to help me to do that. So how do I do the fill handle? I must point to the formula, B6 times C6, because that in essence is what we're copying. So we're going to point to that formula, and then we're going to go to the lower right-hand corner. You see a square in that active cell. When I place my cursor on it, it turns into a plus sign. See that? Again, Here's the square at the lower right-hand corner of the active cell. And we said this is an active cell. All right, how do we know it's an active cell? It has a darker rim around, has a cell pointer, right? So if I place my cursor on that square, that becomes a fill handle. Now, as I drag down the pattern, right? Notice what happens. We said this is a relative cell. So notice the formulas, how they change relative to the row that they're in, right? See, B9, C9, so it's going to go to B10, C10. See, I just use a fill handle and I drag down and it changed relatives. That's why we call it a relative cell reference. So we just calculated the annual sales, right? So the next thing we want to do is to use our mouse place our mouse under the first year, right? So the next thing I want to do is show you how to use the AutoSum. So, for example, there's a wide variety of functions which are pre-written in formulas, right? And the most frequently used function is the sum function. So the sum function totals all the numbers and cells references, included as what we call a function argument. So an argument is nothing more than information that is fed to the function, right? An argument can consist of values, regular numbers, or cell references, or it could be a range, like A9 colon C3, right? So these could all be arguments to the function. So a function can save time and help ensure accuracy of your calculation. And they're available for both simple and complex calculation. For each function has a name, and you can see them in capital like average, AVERAGE spelled out, or date function. So because the sum function is the most commonly used, it has its own button. Isn't that awesome? Because it has its own button, and that button is called AutoSum. So how can we use that button? Well, I'm going to select C14 and D14 together. Say I have an active cell, this is called a range, right? Two or more cells selected adjacently is called a range, right? So notice I selected both because I can carry out this AutoSum with adjacent cells selected. So what I'm trying to do is add my first year unit total and add my annual sales total. So now I've selected that range both under the first year unit and the annual sales. And I'm just going to go over to Home, Editing, and here's my AutoSum button, right? My AutoSum button. And by default, my AutoSum button is just set to sum, right? Because that's more frequently used. You can see that there are others, as I said, they're average, count numbers, maximum, whatever you need, you have to set it. But by default, it's set to sum. So if I click on that, notice what happens, right? And to verify that these numbers are correct, I can use my status bar at the bottom. So for example, this is 130,000. So if I click on the data, highlight the data, and I look on my status bar, look what it says. That's correct. Let's try the other one. I click and drag I'm in ready mode, so I'm dragging, and I can look at the bottom, and wow, that is awesome. So those numbers are correct as well, right? All right, so now that we have data and we have our labels and we have our numbers in our spreadsheet, the next thing we're going to look at is how to change and align and format numbers. All right, so when you enter data in a cell, Excel by default will align the text to the left and align numbers or values to the right. Right? In the cell, if you notice, if I pull the crosshairs, you'll notice the numbers are going to the right, right? Notice what happens here. These are text, right? So they're going to the left. They're going in this direction. Numbers are aligned to that direction, right? Same with the header labels, right? See? Unless I change that, that will remain by default, text to the left and numbers to the right. Okay? So we can also merge and center the cells at the top, right? So there's a couple of things we can do to really affect how our the alignment and the format of our document, right? So before we do that, I want to insert a new column between B and C. I want to insert a new column between B and C. So where's B? Column B and column C, right? I want to insert a column between both. So I'm going to click on the C column. And I'm going to go to Home and Cells and Insert button, right? And I could say Insert a column. And notice the column is inserted to the left, right? And by the way, recognize that you can also use your shortcut menu from your mouse, right? Which is the right mouse key, right? And there you have insert cells as well, right? All right, so the next thing I want to do is enter a new label. And that new label is called release date. That's the release date of my product. Release date. All right, and again, you know how to adjust your crosshairs to make sure that the data is visible and that is seen, right? So on my release date, I'm going to put today's date, right? Today's date. So I'm just going to put the right? And notice I want that to be the short date, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say this is the short date. So I'm formatting it as short date, right? And I'm going to have that release date for all my products, same release date, right? And this time I'm going to highlight both cells arranged, and I'm going to drag to keep it the same, right? Same pattern. So that's an easy way to just fill your data, right? Using the fill handle. You saw when we use it on numbers what happens, and then we just use it on the dates. All right, so the reason I highlighted both is that I want to create a pattern. I don't want to do one, because if I do one, the numbers will increment because it's a number, right? And I don't want it to increment. I want it to stay the same, so that's why I selected both, right? Any questions there? Okay, great. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is select the range A6 to E14, and I'm going to format that with Times New Roman 11 point. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to select the range, all the data here. And I'm saying I want this to be Times New Roman. That's a font. So I'm going to look for Times New Roman, and I can start to type Times New Roman. As I type, notice that the names will appear, right? That's the font name. And I notice that it's already 11 points. That's fine, 11 points. Right? And the other thing I want to do, I'm going to deselect, click off, and I'm going to select again, but I'm going to be selecting the numbers in range D6 to E14, right? And the reason I'm selecting that is I want to make it comma style. What is comma style? Well, you notice the numbers are separated by hundreds, right? So if I use a comma style, my numbers will be separated in hundreds. I also note that the decimals are 0.00, which is fine, right? If I wanted to adjust decimals, I would use the decrease or the increase decimal. And in my case, I don't need to because there are 2 decimal places, right? The other thing that I can do is to use the $sign to represent the dollar amount, right? I can use the $sign, right? Because these are all dollar amounts. So I'm going to use the $sign. Now I'm using the accounting $sign. As you notice, the accounting $sign is different from currency. Because as I move my cursor away, the sign remains to the left, right? It's a different sign than if I use currency, right? Currency, the $sign would still be there. Also, there are certain accounting rules that appear, like for example, when there's a 0, it would be a dash and so on, right? So this is an accounting $sign. Now, notice that I have this pattern already, right? And here I have net prices over here, right? So what I want to do is to copy the same format to my net pricing. So I can click on any cell here that has the format that I want, and I'm going to go to my paintbrush and I'm going to select it once, right? And I'm going to go to cell B6 and I'm going to paint that information. Notice it has copied the format. Now, the paintbrush has 2 functionality. One click allows me to paint once, but if I wanted to hold on to the paintbrush, I would double click on the paintbrush, hold on, and paint as many times as I want. And then I would have to click back on it to release it, right? So remember what I did. First, I must select the format that I want, then select the paintbrush once, and then paint the range that I want. So I'm literally copying the format, in other words. Okay, wow, we're getting somewhere. All right, so the next step is to enhance the report. How can I enhance my report? I can enhance the report to make it look professional and increase its visibility, its visual appeal. So I can use the page layout view. I can add headers and footers. I can do put information in my header and footer pages, and things like that. I'm going to be looking at I can apply a theme. I can add some shadings and border to my title, right? I can do some labels and values. I can change those formats. All right, so let's look how we can do those, right? So the first thing I want to do is format my title, right? And I'm going to format my title so it matches my report. So I'm going to select A1, but I'm going to drag until I get to E1. Why? That's my title for my report, and that's going to be the length of my report, right? Now, what I can do is do a center and merge. So I'm going to go, first I select the range to my report, right? Match my report. And I could go to merge and center and click on that, and you'll see that the information there has been merged and centered, right? Now, similarly to the title, I could do my subtitle, right? But I'm not going to go the length of my report with the subtitle. I'm just going to go here and going to merge and center it there, right? Okay, so the other thing we can do is format our labels, right? Or labels. So I'm going to wrap my labels. I'm going to select the product line row here, net price, release date. I'm going to highlight that, right? So I'm selecting that range. That would be my header labels, right? And I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to wrap them. What does wrap mean? Well, if I wrap them, if my cell increases or decreases, the information in the cell will wrap, right? You'll see how the text wraps as I decrease the size of my cell. You'll see that the cells wrap, right? So one on top of the other. So that's as a result of me clicking on the wrap text above, right? So the other thing I could do then is to center my labels above my data. So how do I do that? I can go to the alignment button and I can click on center, right? And typically you want to make sure that your labels, they're labels. So I'm going to make them a little bigger, right? I'm going to make them 12, right? Because remember we made these 11, right? So I'm going to make those labels 12, right? And typically a header is between 14 and 21, right? But I'm going to apply a theme to this document. So I'm not worried about the format there yet. All right, we said we can also add headers and footer to our report. Headers and footer to our report. So page layout, we're going to go down here, go to our page layout. And right away we can see that we have our header. I'm going to put my name. You can put your name in the header. Right. And this, by the way, the header is only visible when you do a print, right? So put her name there. And notice here I can navigate to the footer, right? And to the footer, I can put the date, current date, and I could also put the current file name, right? So notice on my header footer elements, I have page number, I have number of pages. That simply means page 1 of 2, 1 of 3, 2 of 2, and so on, right? So that not to be confused with just the regular page number, right? And then I can have current date, current time. I could put in the file path. That's where I'm storing the file name. I can even put the name of the sheet. I could put a logo or picture on my file or in the header footer as well. Okay? All right. When I'm done with that, I simply click back in my document, right? Remember, I'm in the page layout view. I'm just going to go back to normal view for a second, right? And by the way, you will see some dotted lines here. Don't be too confused. They're turned on in the options. If you don't like them, you can always turn them off. But I like to see them because they tell me where my normal page break is, right? So if I'm writing on my document, if I go over that line, I know I'm on another page. So I use them as a guide, all right? But they're not printable, so don't worry about them at the moment. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is perhaps put a color shading on my title. So I'm going to highlight the title area again, and this time I'm going to put a shading on there. What's a good color? Light green. How about light green? Right? Perfect, light green. So I can put light green on there. As well as I could do my next step is to select the entire report. And this time, if I wanted to put borders around the entire report, I could do that simply by going to the font and look at my border tool, right? And I could say I want all borders, all borders, right? That will put borders around everything, right? Okay, do you see how I did that? All right, very good. All right, so the next step I want to do is to apply a theme. How do I apply a theme? How do I apply a theme to my report? I'm going to go back to the layout view here, right? Page layout. And notice there's a theme, right? Now, the theme has built-in features already, right? So, for example, if I should click on this theme, you'll see that the font, everything's changed. You can, because it has different colors, different backgrounds, different fonts, right? So that's the Office theme, right? So themes have names. So if you get familiar with these names, you'll know which theme that you used the last time you use it. All right. So notice the preview, right, allows me to see what my report will look like as I go over each theme. Right. See how my report changes. Right. So you can really determine what theme you want to use, right? I'm going to use the crop theme, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on the crop theme, and you'll see that, wow, my report is being formed, right? All right, so the next step is to preview and print my report. If I was going to preview and print this report, how would I go about it? I would have to go to the File tab, and I want to do a print preview first, right? So if I go to print, you'll see that the full report, and it's one page, right? If I had more than one page, page one off. But notice in this format, I could see that my name is in the header and the footer, and I could see the report, right? And I would make sure I pick the right printer, right? I'll be printing the active sheet, right? I would pick the format. If I want to change the layout, I could as well. So for example, I could change it to landscape instead of portrait. Right, so I have the options of doing that. Right, and here I could also see my margin. I could show my margin. What is my margin on the page, right? Again, I'm picking normal margin, or if I pick a wider margin, right? Right, so I can set my margins right here as well. Right, and I can click and I can zoom the view as well, right? So I could say right now there's no scaling. I don't need to scale, but it's available, no scaling. All right, so wide margin, it's a letter or 8.5 by 11 normal page. I changed to landscape. I can collate, so if I had multiple pages, how do I want it printed? Like print on one side, that's a printer specific. If you had a printer that will allow you to print both sides and you had 2 pages, you can use that as well, right? And this is my print my active tree, and this is my printer. And notice there's a check mark. So that printer is attached and ready to go. And if I'm satisfied with my report, I simply click the print button and that will print my report. Okay, so let's recap. What did we cover in this lesson? Pretty much we covered entering labels and values. We worked with columns and rows. We worked with using simple formulas. We worked using the AutoSum. We were able to change alignment and number formats. We were able to enhance our report. And we looked at previewing the report and print the report. All right, so that ends this lesson. Be sure to do the quiz, and good luck.